Alright, more CodingBat. Today we're going to be doing the Warmup-2 section. It does not have as many problems as last time, so hopefully it won't be 2.5 hours, but hey, you never know. So let's go ahead and get started with the first problem here. So this section is going to be a little more complicated. The description says medium warmup string/array loops. So basically, we're going to be using some loops and using some strings and also some arrays, which we'll talk about when we get to one of those problems. So, on this first problem, we're given a string and a non-negative int in. We need to return a larger string that is in copies of the original. So go ahead and pause the video and try this one on your own. Okay, I hope you are back now. Let's go ahead and solve this one. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to basically store a result string. So string result started out as the empty string, and then I'm going to keep adding stir to my result in times basically, and then I'm going to return my result. So the way I do something in times, as we saw in previous videos, is I do a for loop. So I say for int I equals 0, I less than in, I plus plus, and you can think about why this loop should run exactly in times. And notice that this loop is equivalent as saying, or it'll run the same amount of times as saying I equals 1 and then I less than or equal to n. Usually if you want to do something in times, you start the counter out at 0 and then you go I less than the number of times you want to iterate through the code. So the code we want to repeat is I want to say result equals result plus my string. So I'm just going to add my string to the result and then I can return result. And there we go. And note that we can replace this with plus equals. I can say result plus equals stir, as we talked about last time. And that way I can do this just a little more concisely. Now, in newer versions of Java, there's actually a method called repeat on strings that literally will do this whole problem for us, like with one method, with one built-in method. So let me go and see if CodingBat supports that method. I think CodingBat uses an older version of Java though. So let me see. So if CodingBat supports it, we could just do stir.repeat in. But CodingBat does not support it. If we go over to the documentation, we'll see that if we go to the string class, we'll see that down here there is a method called repeat here, but it was added in version 11, and this website uses Java version 8, so I believe. So it does not support this repeat method yet, but if it did, then this whole problem could be done just like that. Fortunately, CodingBat does not support Java 11, so we will just be sticking to this old way of doing it, like that. Okay, so here's the next one. We're given a string and a non-negative int in. We'll say that the front of the string is the first 3 characters, or whatever is there, if the string is less than length 3. Return in copies of the front. So go ahead and pause this video and try this on your own. And hopefully you are back now. Let's go ahead and solve it. So I'm going to get the front first, the front of my string. So I'm going to say, actually, because we've done something like this in the past, I'm just going to skip straight ahead to the what I think, or what I can think of as a good way to do this, is I'm going to say the front is going to be the substring of stir from 0 to the minimum of the length of the string and 3. And so this will give me the first 3 characters, or whatever's there if there's less than 3 characters, just as the instructions tell us. And then all I have to do is make a result string, result, and then just go loop through in times, adding front to the result. And just return my result, and I'll be good. So yeah, pretty straightforward problem here. Again, if what I did here seems a little complicated, make sure you've watched the previous video, or just pause and think about it for a moment. But this does work. It does do what the problem asks. Okay, so the next one says count the number of XX substrings in the given string. We'll say that overlapping is allowed, so XXX contains 2 countXX strings. So go ahead and pause this video and try this on your own. Okay, so this one I think is probably the most complicated one we've seen so far, but it's still not too bad. So I'll first make a variable called, I'll call it xCount that equals the number of x's, or I guess xx count, because it's the number of xx's we've seen in the string so far. So yeah, xx count. And it'll be 0 by default. Actually, that looks just ugly, so I'm gonna just call it count. There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna loop through this string and see wherever I see 2 x characters in a row. So let me go over to MS Paint. I need to open it up so I can show you my strategy a little more in detail. So let's say my string is like A, C, X, 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 P, 5. Okay, that's my string. So, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at each character, and the way I'm going to determine, because I'm going to have to loop through them one character at a time, the way I'm going to determine if I see a double X is I'm going to look at each character and I'm going to ask, is that character an X and the next character an X? So obviously that's not the case here, so then I look here. It's not the case there, so then I look here, and I see that this character is an X and the next character is an X. So therefore I've found one. I'm just going to do tally marks over on the side. So therefore I've found one double X. And then I look at the next one, and I say, is this an X plus and the next one is an X? And the answer is yes, so I'll put another tally mark. And then I look at this one. I say, is this one an X and the next one an X? The answer is no, because the next one is not an X. So therefore I don't put a tally mark there. And then I keep checking to the end of the string. Now notice that I have to stop before the last one. Because if I looked at this last one and I said, is this an X and the next character is an X? Well, there's no next character. And if I try to get the next character, I'm going to get an exception. Or in other words, my program's going to crash if I try to look at an index that's not actually a valid index in this string, because there's no character here. So I'm actually going to have to stop one before the end of my string. So that's just a small thing to note. In order for my strategy to work, of course, there are other ways of solving this too. But let's go ahead and implement that. So I got my count variable there. I'm going to say for int I for each index in the string, and I'm going to go to 1 less than the length of the string. I'm going to say I++, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if the substring from index I to I+2, so that means the 2 characters starting at I, at index I, if that substring equals XX, then my count, I'm going to increment my count there. And I can delete these curly braces, and then I'm going to return the count. And that will do the job there if I can match my parentheses correctly. Okay. So I want to talk about why I didn't need the curly braces here on this for loop. And so remember that an if statement is itself a statement. So count++, this thing here that I've highlighted, is a statement. But then this whole thing here that I've highlighted is also a statement. So count++ is a statement that is contained within the if statement, and the if statement is contained within the broader for statement. So the rules for a for statement for when you need the curly braces is if the thing inside the for statement is only one statement. And notice that this thing I've highlighted is the one single statement that is inside the for statement. And notice that inside the if statement, there's also a count++ statement nested further. If that was a little complicated, don't worry. You can put the curly braces if you want to. There's no harm, there's no shame in putting the curly braces, but you don't have to in this specific scenario. But it's just, I just wanted to let you know so you know what's going on here. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. Alright, the next one it says, given a string, return true if the first instance of x in the string is immediately followed by another x. Alright, so go ahead and pause the video and try this one on your own. Don't use the hint. There's a show hint button. Don't use it unless you have to. But yeah, go ahead and try this one on your own. Okay, I'll assume you're back now. So let's go ahead and solve this. So let's see. before we solve this, I want to show you a nice method on the string class. I actually don't know what this hint says. Let's actually read it today. Okay, yeah. This is exactly what I was about to tell you. So let's look at the index of method. So I'm going to go over to the string documentation here. I'm going to scroll down until I find the index of method. And the reason I'm doing this is not because I don't know what index of means. The reason I'm doing this is I'm showing you how, if you needed to look up a method, you could do it, because the goal is not to have me tell you what every single thing does, because there's as you can see, there's a lot of things, and I don't exactly have time to tell you what every single one of these things mean, and also I don't know what all these things are, all these methods are. Um, so if you need to look up a method, this is how you would do it. So there's the index of method here. If you want to know what it does, you can click on it and you could read what it tells you here. But I'll go ahead and tell you and summarize it. So basically what the index method does, or sorry, the index of method does, is here's how you use it. So from the string, you call index of, and to the index of function, you pass a character. You can pass actually a character or a whole string, like, whatever we want to pass there, but let's just pass a character for now. And what this function will do, what this method will return, is an int. And that int will be the index of the first occurrence of this character in my string. And if this character does not occur anywhere in my string, this method will return -1. Now, if you pass a whole string to the index of method, so if I say like hi, if I pass that to my index of method, this will now return the index of the h in the first time hi occurs. So in other words, this will return the start index of the first time the given substring occurs in stir. And again, it'll return -1 if hi does not appear anywhere in stir. So we can use that to our advantage. So I'm going to say the first x index. I'm going to create a variable there. And so that's just going to be stir.index of x. So this int, first x index, now is the index of the first time that x occurs in my string. Okay. And so I need to see if the first instance of x is immediately followed by another x. Now these instructions are not clear what to do in the case of no x's in the string. So I'm actually going to click go here to see if it actually tests that in the test cases, because the instructions are not clear. So, and actually it's going to make me put a return statement. So I'm just going to return false before it'll let me see. So it expects me to return false if the first index, or if there are no x's in the string. And let me read the instructions again. Given a string, return true if the first instance of x is followed immediately by another x. So yeah, the instructions are not clear here. So that's unfortunate. So let's actually, but now we know that if there's not an x, it expects us to return false, so we can do that. So let's actually handle that case first. So if first x index is -1, as I just told you, the index of method returns -1 if what you give it does not appear anywhere in stir. So if first x index is -1, then we know that x does not appear anywhere in the string, and according to our test cases, that means we should return false. So I'm just going to handle that right away. And now I need to see if this x is immediately followed by another x. Now there's one thing that might trip you up here, and that's that if the first x occurs at the very end of the string, let me see if I can find an example like that. Yeah, right here. If the first x occurs at the very end of the string, if you try to check the next character after this x, you'll be out of bounds with the string, and your program will crash because there's no character after this x. So we need to handle that. So what I'm going to test first of all is that if the first x index is less than the length of the string -1, and what this means, what basically this is saying is, if the first x does not appear as the last character in the string, right? Because if first index was equal to stir.length -1, then the first x index, or the first x would occur as the last character in the string, which we don't want. So if the first x index is not the last character in the string, so it occurs somewhere earlier than stir.length -1, and the next character, so stir.char@, the next index, first x index plus 1, that'll be the next index, and the character at the next index is also x, then we can return true, otherwise we can return false. Let me scroll over. return false. Okay, and did I mess this up? I need to do that there. Okay, and that will work. This line here is kind of long. I'm just going to actually delete the word index. I'm going to rename my variable here. Maybe that'll make it a bit shorter. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. The box on CodingBat is very small. But usually the line I wrote there would be an acceptable line. It wouldn't be obsessively or excessively long. Okay, so this is how we could solve this problem. So yeah, and we could condense this down. If you'd like to have a try at shortening this code, feel free to do so, but I don't think we really need to. I think this code is fine as it is. So let's go ahead and if you want to, you can see their solution. I think they've had solutions for a lot of these things. So yeah. So let's see. Yeah, and they actually give us some other solutions here, which you can look at if you want to. They're testing. Let's see. Yeah, this thing here that says if the substring starting at the first index of x is XX, then that'll also work. So that actually is quite a clever way to do that. So yeah, their solutions are also pretty good too. Yeah, and I'm actually going to write that one out here. Let's go ahead and do that. So we have the first x index. We need to get that still. Actually, I don't need to. I'll just put this up here. So the first x index, and let's see. So if the substring starting at first x dot starts with, so if the substring starts with XX, because once we've taken, once we've started from the index first x, we've chopped off basically everything before the first x character, and now we see if it starts with XX. So we could just return this, which is quite a clever way to do it. Except, let's see, we still need to check if it's -1. So return, and we could cram this all into one line if we want to, or put it as if statement. So return. So we could also do if first x does not equal -1, and that would also be a way to solve it. So yeah, plenty of ways to do any of these problems. And I actually quite like this solution, so I'm gonna leave it there. Okay, so let's do the next one. It says given a string, return a new string made of every other character, starting with the first. So hello yields HLO. Go ahead and pause the video and try this one on your own. Okay, hopefully you are back now. Let's do this problem. So this one, it's not too complicated. I'm just going to, again, start with a result string and just build on top of it and keep adding stuff to it. So I'm going to do a for loop, and I'm going to, instead of incrementing by 1, incrementing I by 1 every time, I'm going to increment I by 2. So we're still going to start with I equals 0. We're still going to go while I is less than start out length. But now I'm just going to increment by 2 every time. And I'm just going to my result, I'm going to add the character at index I, and then I'm going to return the result. And there you have it. That will be how we could do that one. Notice that I could also do substring here, start out substring I to I plus 1. That would be an acceptable way to do it as well. If we do char at, the char will implicitly be converted to a string, as I've mentioned several times. So that will solve that one there. Okay, now we have given a non-empty string like code, return something like return a string like C, CO, COD, CODE. So what it looks like they're doing is they're just taking the first character, and then the first 2 characters, and then the first 3 characters, then the first 4 characters, etc., etc., until you've used all the characters. So go ahead and try this one on your own, and then I'll be back to solve it. Okay, so let's solve it here. What I'll do, once again, unsurprisingly, I'll start with a result here, a result string right there, and we will go ahead and do this. So I'm basically taking substrings of the given string repeatedly and appending them to each other, or in other words, concatenating them to each other. So my first substring goes, or only takes the first character. So in other words, the first substring is the substring from if I were calling substring, I would pass in 0 to 1, right? Because that, if I did code, the string code.substring 0 to 1, that would just give me the capital C. If I did str.substring 0 to 2, that would give me CO. And then if I did str.substring 0 to 3, that would be COD, and etc. until the end of the string. So I, of course, can do a for loop to do that. So say for int I equals 1. So I'm going to start at 1 now instead of starting at 0. Now, if you put I equals 0, it actually wouldn't affect the result because then you'd be getting a substring from 0 to 0, which is just the empty string, so it wouldn't actually have a result. But we don't need to start at 0. We only need to start at 1, so I'll start at 1 here. And then we're going to increment again. So I'm going to add to my result, I'm just going to add the substring from 0 to I, and then I can return my result. And let's see, oh, it looks like I need to go less than or equal to the length of the string. Okay, so the reason I needed to go less than or equal to the length of the string is because this last substring, if I wanted to get the whole string, as we've mentioned, I need to do str.substring. I need to go from 0 to the length of the string, to the entire length of the string. And so that means that I do need to actually call this substring when I equals str.length. So not only while I is less than str.length, but also when I equals str.length, I also need to call it there and append it to my result. So I need to go all the way until I is equal to str.length. Okay, so there we have that problem. Let's see how they did it. Yep, pretty much identically. Let's go on to the next one. Alright, so here we're given a string. We need to return the count of the number of times that a substring length 2 appears in the string, and also as the last two characters of the string. So hi XXX hi yields 1. We won't count the end substring. So basically, rephrasing that, they want us to count the number of times that the last two characters, that the substring containing only the last two characters, occurs elsewhere in the string. And although they don't say it in the problem, it looks like, looking at the third example, that overlapping is allowed. Again, I kind of wish these instructions were a bit clearer. But yeah, go ahead and try this one on your own now. Okay, so let's go ahead and solve it. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get the last two characters of the string. And so, and it looks like from the instructions that we are allowed to have inputs less than 2 because it doesn't say otherwise. So now if the length of the input is less than 2, in fact, even if it's equal to 2, we know that our return value should be 0 because there's no way the last two characters can occur elsewhere in the string if there aren't even two characters. And there's also no way the last two characters can occur elsewhere in the string if the string is only those last two characters, because there is no elsewhere in the string. So if the length of the string is less than or equal to 2, we just want to return 0 right away. And now we can actually do some stuff here. So the last two is going to be the substring starting at the length of the string minus 2, and I'm going to use the one argument version of substring, so that will just take starting at this index to the end. And then I'm going to count the number of times this occurs elsewhere in the string. So let's think about how to do that. So I'm going to start at index 0, and I'm going to loop through all the characters. And I'm going to like before when we were doing the XX problem, where we want to find the number of times XX occurs. I'm going to do this in a similar way, except now I don't want to loop until start.length minus 1, since I actually want to ignore the last two characters, right? In the XX problem, I just wanted to ignore the last one character, because if I included the last one character, I'd go out of bounds when trying to look at the next one. So I want to ignore the last two characters. So I'm going to go start.length minus 2. Now notice that my algorithm, or my, strategy that I'm using to solve this, which, is also known as an algorithm. My algorithm, if it was given the string, if it was given the string x, x, or let's just do b, b, b. If it was given this input, so the last two characters are bb, and so bb also occurs right here. So my program would output 1 if it was given this input. And so the instructions and the examples here aren't exactly clear on that. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward with my strategy here, which would include bb and an input like this. So, and if we didn't want to include bb, if we only wanted to include things that did not include either of the last two characters, then I would need to loop until start out length -3. But I'm going to do -2. Then I'm just going to go I++, and then if the the substring, the two characters starting at I equals the last two characters, then I want to increment my count. I need to make a count first, and count equals 0, and then I just return the count, and that will do it. So let's see, is there anything we need to talk about here? We get the last two. We first check the special case. I don't think so. I think this is good. And let me see if they actually give us a case like I was talking about in my input. Okay, so yeah. So it looks like the way I solved it was the way they wanted to. Again, I wish they would be clear on how they wanted to. So they do believe that this has two matches, the first two characters and then these two characters here. So yeah, this is how we would solve this one. I really wish they would be clearer, though, in the instructions. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Okay, so now, if you can solve this one on your own, go ahead and try it. But I don't think you will be able to if you only know the stuff I've told you. So in this problem, we get introduced to arrays. It says, given an array of ints, return the number of 9s in the array. Let's talk about what an array is for just a second. I'm actually going to go over to an IDE here, which means I actually have to open my IDE, so give me just a second. Okay, here I am in my IDE here. Let's go ahead and talk about arrays real quick. So far, the variables we've used, like Boolean, int, string, they're just one thing. Like a Boolean is just a true or false value. An int is just a number, a single number. A string is just a single piece of text. But we can use what's called an array to store just an ordered sequence of things. So like, let's say I want to store 5 ints. Let's say these are like the scores of students on a test, right? So let's say I want to just store like, and I have 10 students, so I want to store 10 things in a row. Or let's even say I had like 20 students. Well, I could create 20 variables. I could say score 1, score 2, score 3, score 3, score 4, and this would take quite a while. This would go on for a long time. So I don't want to do that because that's a lot of variables and that would be really annoying. But so what I can do instead is I can create an array. So you can think of an array as just like a bunch of variables of the same type that are put together, ordered together into a sequence. So let me give you an example. So the way we create an array, let's say I want to create an array of ints. So that is a sequence of ints. What I do is I say int array. So the way you denote an array of a certain type is you put the name of the type, and then you put two brackets after it, an open bracket and a closed bracket. So and this will create an array of the given type. So this thing here, this type right here I've just highlighted, this is an int array. That's how you would say it, and it's just an ordered sequence of ints. So to create a variable, an int array variable, I'm going to just call it r. And the way you create an array is you say new, and then the type of the array, so like the type of the elements of the array, the items in the array. So new int array, and then inside of these brackets, you put the size of the array. So in other words, the number of items that are going to be in this array. So I'm going to put 10 because I want 10 items. I'm just going to say I have 10 items in this array. Okay. And so that's basically how it works. Now, what do I do if I want to get one of the items from this array? Let's say I want to get the first item from this array, the first number in this array. Or actually, first let's set the first number in this array. So by default, if you create an array of ints, all the values in this array, all the 10 values will be 0 by default. So let's set one of the values. So just like strings, arrays use indexes, and those indexes start at 0. So the first element, they're called elements, the items in an array are called elements. The first element in my array is going to be at index 0. And the way I get a variable, or sorry, not a variable, the way I get an element at a specific index in an array is I type the name of the array, and then inside some square brackets, that's what these are called, square brackets, opposed to like curly brackets. I put in square brackets, I put the name of the array, then in square brackets I put the index I want to get. So I want to get the first item in this array, the first element in this array. So I say R0, I'm not going to assign it the value, let's say we're doing scores of students, this guy got, a 92. Okay, so now I've set the first value in my array, that is the item at index 0. I set it to 0. So now I'm going to print out, so you can see I'm going to print out the value of at index 0. And so if you do this here, R with bracket 0, that just refers to the item, the element at index 0. You can think of these, again, as I was talking about earlier, as variables. So you can think about R0 as a variable, and then R1 would be a separate variable, and then R2 would be, I'm sorry, Eclipse is auto-indenting trying to be helpful, but it's not being helpful right now. Okay, so then you can think about R0 is a variable, R1 is a variable, R2 is a variable, R3 is a variable, etc. So you can think about these as just a bunch of variables that you can access with an index. So just like I could print out a variable, an int variable, I can print out the index of an array. And so if I print this out, this will print out 92, of course. Now, if you want to, let's see what else we can do with an array. So let me first show you that by default, the values in the array are 0. So I'm going to print out, like, let's do index 1 and index 2. And we can do index 3 and index 4. These will all be 0, right? Because the values in an array are 0 by default. Now, let's say you want to create an array, and you already know what values you want that array to have. Well, when you're creating the array, you can actually put those values in there just in a single line. This is a sort of convenient feature they added to Java. So let me show you how to do that. So let's say I want to create an array. Let's do an int array. Here, let's call it, I'll just call it like A, or I'll just call it R. There we go. No, not R. Let's do T. Sorry, I don't want to confuse ARR with the letter R. So let's just do T. Okay, so if you already know the values you want to put in the array, what you can do is you can open curly brackets, and inside these curly brackets, we're not going to put enter. We're not going to type enter. We're not going to make a new line, because we're just going to put in the values that I want in my array here. So let's say I want 5 values in this array. Let's say I want 7, 5, 3, 4, and 3. Those are the values I want in my array. So if I want to create an array with those values, I can do that just like this. And so this array, it has length 5, and it has these values at each of its indices. And I can verify that here. If I print out index 0, and I'm just going to print out every single index here, index 1, index 2, index 3, index 4, I can print out the numbers in my array. And hopefully you can already see that if you wanted to print out every value in an array, no matter its size, you could use a for loop over the array. But of course, in order to use a for loop, you need to know how long the array is. And the way you determine the length of the array is you just print out, or sorry, let me first actually print this out first. Let's say length. I'm going to get the length of it. And the way you get the length of an array is you just type the name of the array, t, and then you do dot length. So no parentheses after it, like in string. For an array, you just do length. We could go into why there are parentheses on string and why there are not parentheses here, but don't worry about it. This is not technically a function that we're calling from the array. It's something else, but don't worry about it. Just know that this is how you get the length of the array. Again, it's not that I don't want to go into why that is the case. It's just that we don't need to go into it right now because we want to do some coding bats. So that will get me t.length will get me the length of the array t. So that will be 5. And that's really all there is to arrays. There's not like a bunch of cool methods like there are on strings. There's really just you can get values at indices, you can assign to indices to the values at or to the variables at each index, and you can get the length of the array. That's really all there is. They're not as interesting as, or they don't have as many features on them as strings have. Now, there is a class. So a class you can think about as like a big old group of functions bundled together. There's a class called arrays with capital A. It's written like this, arrays. There's a class called arrays that, like the math class we looked at earlier, has a bunch of useful functions, and we can use those functions to do cool stuff with arrays, as you could probably guess from the class name. So this class, unlike the math class, this is not a class that you have access to by default. So the math class you do have access to by default, but the arrays class you don't. And so the way you get access to the arrays class, if you were in an IDE, like this one, again, in CodingBat, we're not really in an IDE, so you can't exactly do this thing that I'm about to do. But the way we would get access to this fancy arrays class is we would do, you could say import java.util.arrays. And this will give us access to the arrays class. And one of the useful methods on the arrays class is this method called arrays.toString. So if you call this method, in other words, if you use this function and you pass it an array such as t, it will give you a nice pretty representation of the array as a string. See? This line here is a nice, just one line string representation of my array. So this is a convenient method if you need to print out an array. You can do it like this. Now the arrays class has a bunch of other useful methods. We'll perhaps look at some of them later, but for now this is the only one we're really going to talk about, the arrays.toString method. So going back to our CodingBat here, notice that, or one thing to point out about CodingBat is that CodingBat automatically imports the arrays class for us, which is very nice of CodingBat. They do this for us, so we don't have to type this import statement anywhere. CodingBat has done this for us automatically. It has automatically given us access to the arrays class so we can use it. And let me just verify that. You'll see that if I do like string s equals arrays.toString nums, this is not going to help us solve the problem, by the way. I'm just trying to show you that we do have access to the arrays class. And I need to put a return statement so that it will let me run it. But you'll see that it works. I don't get, of course, it doesn't solve the problem, but I don't get a compile error. It doesn't crash because I do have access to the arrays class. Whereas if I didn't have access to the arrays class, like if I deleted it up here in my IDE, I'd get a compile error. And it would tell me that I don't have access to the arrays class. I was about to say BlueJ. So CodingBat gives us access to the arrays class automatically, which is very nice. Okay, so you won't need the arrays class here. In fact, here all you need is some looping knowledge and some thinking skills and the ability to access elements at certain indices in the array, which you all now know how to do. So if you want to now pause the video and try this on your own, I would suggest that. But I will go ahead and solve it now. Okay, so you want to return the number of 9s in the array. So I'm going to again get a count variable. This is going to be the number of 9s we've seen in the array. So I'm going to start it off at 0. And then for each item in the array, so I can do it like this. I can say for I less than nums.length. This is very similar to iterating through the characters in a string. I can say I++. And then if the the element at index I. So if this element that I'm currently looking at is a 9, I'm going to increment the count. And then when I'm done, I'm going to return the count. Just like that. And that will do the trick here. So that is how you could do this problem. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So, this next problem here. It says, given an array of ints, return true if one of the first 4 elements in the array is a 9. The array length may be less than 4. So, you have all the tools to solve this now. Go ahead and try this one on your own. Okay, so hopefully you've tried it now. Let's go ahead and solve it. So, what I'm going to do actually first is I'm going to figure out where we need to loop to. Sorry, in other words, what's the max index we need to loop to. So, if we knew that the array was always going to have at least 4 elements, I could just loop until index 4, right? I could just go for I less than 4. But the array could be shorter than 4 elements. So I'm going to figure out the index that I have to loop to. So I'll just call it max for the max index. For the maximum index, for the upper bound of the indexes that I need to loop through. And in fact, maybe max is not the best word. I'll just call it upper, because it's the upper bound of the indexes I need to loop through. So the upper bound is going to be the minimum of the number of elements in my array and 4. So what this basically is going to be is if my array is bigger than 4 elements, I just want to loop until while I is less than 4, right? But if my array is less than 4 elements, I want to be looping while I is less than the length of my array, is less than nums.length. So now that I've got this useful upper variable, I could just run a for loop over it, and I can see, let's see, for int I equals 0, I is less than upper, I plus plus, if nums I equals 9, I'm going to return true, and then if I never return true, I'll get down here, and then I'll return false. So remember how a return statement causes the method to immediately terminate and produce the value that you say after the word return. So if while I'm iterating through this loop I find a 9, I'm going to abruptly complete the method and return true. And then if I never return true, so if I go through this whole for loop and I never find a 9, then and only then will I get down to this last statement, and then I'll return false. So that's how we would solve this problem. The only tricky line is probably this first one. So go ahead, and if you need to pause and ponder why this will work, this is just again the upper bound on the indices I need to look through in order to check the first 4 elements, or whatever elements are there if there are less than 4. So that is a way to solve this problem here. And of course, there are other problems. You could have specific cases for all the lengths less than 4. Like I could say if nums.length equals 0, which by the way, you can have an array of length 0 that just has nothing in it. I could say return false. I could say if nums.length equals 1. I could say return if the first number is 9. I could say if nums.length equals 2. Return the first number equals 9 or the second number equals 9. I could say if nums.length equals 3. Return if the first number equals 9 or the second number equals 9 or let's see, oh sorry, this is the second number at index 1 equals 9 or the third number equals 9. And then I don't need this upper part here. I'll comment it out. I can just say I less than 4. So this would be another way to do it, but as you can see, it's quite a bit longer. So I like this math.min strategy and then just looping up until whatever the correct index would be. So I like my solution a bit better. So that is what I'm going to go with here. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. All right, so it's called array123. Given an array of ints, return true if the sequence of numbers 1, 2, 3 appears in the array somewhere. Go ahead and pause and try this on your own. Okay, so like the string one earlier, I'm going to head over to Paint real quick and talk about this. My strategy is going to be to look through my numbers. Let's say I have 1, 2, this is my calligraphy pen. Oh, I don't mean to be using that. Okay, so let's say my numbers are, I'm gonna separate them by commas now. 1, 2, 7, 1, 2, 3, 1, 8, 9, and then 27. Okay, so that's going to be my strategy here. Or sorry, this is going to be my numbers here, and now I'll tell you my strategy. So I'm going to look through all the numbers, one at a time, and I'm going to say, does the sequence 1, 2, 3 start at the index I'm currently looking at? So does 1, 2, 3 start at where the arrow currently is? Well, I see 1, I see 2, but I don't see 3. So the answer is no. So I've not found 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to look at the next index. Do I see 1, 2, 3? No, I don't. Look at the next index. Is that 1, 2, 3? No, it's not. Next index, that is 1, 2, 3. So I'm good there. And if I wanted to, I now know that I found a 1, 2, 3 here, and I could skip straight to this index if I wanted to. And that might technically make my code a little faster, but I don't really care. It's not going to matter in this problem, so I'm not going to worry about that. So I'm just going to keep on looping through, even though I know I couldn't see a 1, 2, 3 starting here or here. So I'm going to look here, and I'm going to say, is that 1, 2, 3? No, it's not. It's 2, 3, 1, though. I'm going to look here. Is that 1, 2, 3? No. Is that 1, 2, 3? No, it's not. Say here, is that 1, 2, 3? No, it's not. Is this 1, 2, 3? No. And now I need to stop, right? Because if I look at this one, and I say 1, 2, 3, then uh-oh, I have this area here. This is out of bounds of my array, and my program's going to crash. So I can't go all the way up to there. I have to stop right here. In other words, I have to stop to before the end of the array. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and write that code. So let's do it. So let's go starting at index 0. Did I tell you to pause the video? I hope so. Go ahead and do that if I didn't. Okay, so we're going to start at index 0. And I'm going to ignore the last two, or not ignore, but I'm going to stop to before the end of the array. So I'm going to go to nums.length minus 1, and then increment, of course. And then I'm going to see if I see the sequence 1, 2, 3 starting at index I. So if nums I equals 1, and the next number, nums I plus 1 equals 2, and the next number after that, nums I plus 2 equals 3, then I can return true. Otherwise, I'm going to return false. And that will do the trick there. So that's how we could solve this one. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else to say here. That is how we could do this one. Yeah, and they did it pretty much the same way I did. These parentheses and their solution are not necessary, but you could put them if you'd like to. Okay. So now we are given two strings, A and B, and we need to return the number of positions where they contain the same length 2 substring. So XXCAAZZ and XXBAAZ yields 3, since the XXAA and AZ substrings appear in the same place in both strings. Okay, so go ahead and pause and try this one on your own. Okay, let's go ahead and solve it now. All right, so let's think about this, right? So if one string is longer than the other, and let's see, does it tell us that they will both have the same length? It does not. Yeah, so we do need to be concerned about the possibility that one string might be longer than the other. And in fact, in this first example, the first string is longer than the second string. And the reason we need to be concerned about that is because if I'm trying to compare two spots in a string, but one is longer than the other, then I might be comparing a spot in one string that doesn't even exist in the other string. Let me give you an example over in the lovely MS Paint. So let's say let's say I have cat, dog, cat. That's going to be my first string. And then on the bottom, or my other string is going to be like owl. Okay, so one string is a lot longer than the other. So I could go through this string, right, and I could compare the indices, right? I could compare these two to these two, then I could compare these two to these two. But then if I keep going like that and I try to compare these two to these two, well, there's nothing right here, right? There's nothing there. So if I try to look at this index, I'm going to get an exception and my program's going to crash. So we don't want that. So we need to figure out where the shorter of the two strings ends. So right here, I need to figure this out in my code, and then I need to go no further than this line. And in fact, if I'm doing a strategy similar to the ones I've been doing before, where I go to an index and then I look at the next two characters, and then I go to an index and I look at this character in the next one, I'll actually need to stop one before this dotted line. I'll need to stop here, right? Because if my index was here, I'd be looking at these two characters, which would mean I'm looking at these two characters, and then I'd crash. So I actually need to stop one before this dotted line here. So let me draw that a bit better. So I need to stop right here, and so I need to have cursor here, and I look at these, and then cursor here, and I look at these, and then I stop. So let's go ahead and implement that in code. So I'm going to first get the shorter length. So this will be the location of the dotted line in my image earlier. So shorter, or I'll just call it len, be the shortest length. So I'm going to do the shortest length. I could do an if statement, do a couple of if statements here if I wanted to. But an easier way to do this is just to find the minimum of their two lengths. So the minimum of A's length and, sorry, not and, the minimum of B's length. So there we go. This will give me the minimum length. And then I want to loop up to one less than this minimum length, right? Because we want to go one less than the dotted line. So I less than len minus 1, I plus plus. And then we are going to need a count variable here as well. Okay, and then I can say if, let's see, a substring starting at this index, so the next two characters of A, and, sorry, equals the next two characters of B, not subtracting, sorry, substring I to I plus 2. If these are equal, then I can return, sorry, not return true, I need to increment count, and then I return count when I'm done. So there we go, and that will solve this problem here. A lot of these, the general idea is not too complicated, right? You know, iterating through the list, comparing the two characters. It's just the special cases that you've got to be aware of, the exceptions, the possible crashes, the edge cases, as they're called in programming. Special cases are sometimes called edge cases or corner cases, the sort of rarer cases that you need to handle specially. So that is how we could solve this one. Okay, so now we're asked, given a string, return a version where all the X characters have been removed, or all the X substrings have been removed. Same thing here. Except an X at the very start or very end should not be removed. Okay, so go ahead and try this one, pause the video and try this one on your own. Okay, so let's go ahead and solve this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a string result here. And I'll show you that there is actually a way to do this in one line or in a very concise way, I'll say. There's a very concise way to do this. But first we'll show the more intuitive way that uses stuff that I've told you so far. So I'll start with the result string and I'll go through it. And so I want to add the first character regardless. So I'm going to say result plus equals the first character. And in fact, I can, as a special case, I can see that if the length of the string is 2 or less, then I just can return the string. So if the length of the string is less than or equal to 2, I can just return the string, right? because the first and last characters are the only two characters in the string if its length is 2, and therefore I should not be removing them whether or not they're an X. So first I can handle that case. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop through all of the interior characters in the string, and by interior characters I just mean the characters that aren't the very first or very last. I'm going to loop through all the interior characters, and if those characters are not an X, then I'm going to add them to my result. And then at the end, of course, I'm going to add the last character of my string to my result. So to get the interior characters, I'm going to start at index 1, not index 0, and I'm going to loop not to start out length, but to start out length minus 1. And then what I'm going to say is if the character at that index, so the character at index I is not an X, I'm going to add it to my result, not plus equals X, but plus equals start out char at I, and then I'm going to return my result. And actually, wait, before I return my result, I need to also add in the last character. So plus equals stir.char, char at stir.length minus 1. Alright, and that will solve that one there. So let's talk about a better way to do this, or a more concise way of doing this. This, of course, will work, but we can do it more concisely. So let's go ahead and do that. So I will introduce you now to a method on the string class. Let's go over here to our documentation. It is called replace. So it's called replace. And so what this method does is you can pass it two strings, and it'll replace every occurrence of the first string with the second string. So this may not seem very relevant at first, but what I can do is if the first string is, something like X, and the second string is just an empty string, what replacing any real string with the empty string will do is it will effectively remove the first string you passed in. So here's what we'll do. Let me comment this out for now. Do that there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to return, so let's see. I'm going to get the interior characters of the string, but without any X's. So I'm going to say string interior no X equals the substring from 0 to the length minus 1. Sorry, not 0, from 1 to the length minus 1. And then I'm going to call replace. I'm actually going to make this variable smaller just so we can see more text on the screen. I'm going to replace X, the string X, with the empty string. So I'm replacing every occurrence of X with nothing. So in other words, I'm basically removing X. And then now all I need to do is re-add on the first and the last character. So let's say stir.char at 0 plus no X plus stir.char at stir.length minus 1. And that will do this much more concisely here. And of course you could cram this all into one line if you wanted to by replacing no X with this whole expression here, but I won't bother with that. You can do that if you'd like to. Let's see how they did it. Yeah, they did a similar thing, except instead of handing the special case out here, they sort of included it within their loop. And then they also, what did they do? Yeah, inside their if statement, they made sure to check if I is not the beginning or the ending character. So that's another way to do it there as well. All right, let's go to the next one. It says, given a string, return a string made of the characters at indexes 0, 1, 4, 5, 8, 9, and so on. So hopefully you can see the pattern, right? We go, we take every fourth index, so 0, 4, 8, 12, 16, and we add that character plus the character after it. So go ahead and pause and try this on your own. Okay, so let's go ahead and solve this. This one I don't think is too difficult. I'll start with my result, and I'll say for int I equals 0, and we'll go until the string's end. And then what I'll do is I'll increment by 4 every time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add every fourth character, but when I add every fourth character, I'm also going to add the next character. So I'm going to say result plus equals, first of all, this character, the character at this index, and then I want to do also the next character. So str.char at I plus 1. There. Now, if I run this code now, it's actually not going to work, and I want you to try and pause and think about why it's not going to work. I'll go ahead and run it to show you. So it is not quite going to work, and so go ahead and pause if you want to, and try and think about why this doesn't work quite yet. So, hopefully you did pause, and or you didn't need to pause and you figured it out. So the reason it doesn't work quite yet is because even though the index, like the multiple of 4 index might be in bounds, we don't necessarily know that the next index is going to be in bounds. So while I know that I know that I is in bounds, right, because I is less than str.length, I don't necessarily know while I'm in the body of this loop that I plus 1 is in bounds, because I might be equal to str.length minus 1, in which case I plus 1 is not in bounds. So I need to do a special check here. If I is not only less than str.length, but less than str.length minus 1, so in other words, this is saying if there is a character after I, then I know that that I plus 1 is going to be in range, that index is going to be in range, and therefore I can add that there. And so now this is going to work. Another equivalent way of saying this is if I does not equal str.length minus 1. So if I is not the last character, therefore it must have a character after it, and therefore I plus 1 must be a valid index. So that's how you could do that problem there. All right, and notice that we do need the curly braces here because we now have multiple statements going on inside of our for loop. Let's see how they did it real quick. They are doing, okay, so yeah, they are also incrementing by 4, and they're just doing the body of their loop a little differently. You can look into that if you'd like to. All right, so let's do this one. So it says, suppose the string yak is unlucky. Given a string, return a version where all the yak are removed, so all the yak substrings are removed, but the a can be any char. So the yak, sorry, it says the yak strings will not overlap. Okay, so there is a way to do this in one line, I believe, but not using things I've taught you. So go ahead and pause the video and try this using stuff I've told you so far, and then I'll solve it using stuff I've told you so far, and then I'll solve it using stuff I haven't told you so far. So go ahead and pause the video now and try that. Okay, so now we will go ahead and solve this. So I'm going to do results once again, and I'll start it out with as an empty string. And then I'm going to loop through and find all the yaks. And so if what I find is not a yak, then I'm going to include it. If it is a yak, I'm going to skip over it. Now, the logic inside of our loop, so when I say logic, I just mean like the code, pretty much, inside of our loop is going to get a little complicated here. So I just want to think for a second about how might be the best way to do this. Let's see, so, okay, yeah, I think I know what will be a good way to do this. So I'm going to loop through all the characters. So I'm going to say for int I equals 0. And now I'm going to skip the last, or I'm going to ignore the last 2 characters. Because again, if I included them and I tried to look at the next 3 characters, starting at one of the last 2 characters, I would go out of bounds. If you need to rewind and listen to what I just said, please do. But I'm going to go and I'm going to ignore the last 2 characters. So I'm going to say I plus plus here. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. So if, let's see, if the character at this index is a y, and the character 2 indexes down is a k, then I know I have some yak stuff going on here. So let's see what we should do here. So obviously I don't want to add anything to result here. I want to skip over this yak part here. So what I'm going to do, right, if I don't skip over this, then I is just going to get incremented by 1, and I'm going to include the character that comes between y and k. I'm going to include that middle character there. So that's not good. What I want to do here is I want to just skip over until I get past the k. And sorry, this should be I plus 2 here. I want to skip over until I get past this k. So what I'm going to do is, let's think about this, right? The next time I enter this loop, I want I to be equal to 3 more than it is now, because I want to skip these 3 characters, y, the middle character, whatever comes between y and k. So I want to skip y, and then something, and then k. So I want to skip the next 3 characters. So next time this loop enters, it should be, I should be 3 greater than what it was right now, what it is right now. So I'm going to increment I by 2. And then I'm going to use a special word here called continue. And I'm just going to put a semicolon. This whole thing is just one statement on its own. Continue, semicolon. And what this will do is this will start the loop over again. So this will basically go over, do whatever the increment thing is, check the condition again, and then go through the loop again, if the condition is true, of course. So this continue, it's like a mini return statement. Instead of returning the whole method, though, it just returns like this iteration of the loop and starts the loop over again, checking the condition again and doing the increment. So that's what I'll do here. And notice that the reason I'm only incrementing 2, even though I need to increment 3, is because when I do continue, this increment is going to be called. So in total, with these 2 being incremented here, plus this 1 increment over here, that's going to be a total of 3 increments. So I is going to be increased by 3 the next time. Well, by the next time it goes through the loop. Okay, and then otherwise, right? Otherwise, I just want to include this character. I just want to add it to my result here, plus equals the character at this index. And then I'm going to return my result. And let's see, what have I done here? Yeah, so this should include pack. So if char at I equals y, and the character at the next index equals that. So let's see, mine is just giving p. Oh, and then, let's see, so I guess I actually technically don't want to loop until or I don't want to ignore the last 2 characters because I still need to include them. So let's see. I'm actually going to loop until the end of the string, but I'm only going to go through this if statement. I'm only going to enter this if statement if I is less than str.length minus 2. And I really wish the box on this website was bigger. So I'm going to split this up onto 2 lines. I know it looks very ugly. So yeah, sorry about that. So I'm only going to enter this part if I is less than, or if I is not one of the last 2, at one of the last 2 characters. And now it will work. So that is basically how you might solve this one. I know this is kind of a messy thing we have going on here. So although I did show you the continue statement, you actually don't need it here if you do an else block. If I elided the else block and I just did this here, I would need continue, right? Because if I didn't have continue, then it would just go through, it would just enter this if statement, do I plus equals 2, and then still do this line. But if I put an else block on here, then the stuff inside the else block is only executed if the if block wasn't. Whereas with no else block, this result plus equals stuff is executed regardless, right? So if I do an else block, I don't need continue, but if I didn't put an else block, I would need continue. So that's how we could do this. We could remove some of these curly braces if we wanted to as well. I'm going to leave them in here because generally if my if statement is spanning multiple lines, I tend to leave in the curly braces. Again, it's just a matter of style. You could omit them here if you wanted to. But that would solve this one. So I'm checking if I have a yak substring, or if I have a yak sequence where the middle character can be anything. Then I just skip past it. I do I plus equals 2. Otherwise, I add the character at this index. And that will solve the problem here. let's see how they did it real quick. And yeah, they did it basically exactly how I did. Like literally exactly how I did. So yeah, same variable names and everything. Um, so yeah, that's how you could solve this one. Here, yeah. I'm just making sure, yeah. Okay, so we did it pretty much the same. Okay, so let me show you now a little bit more concise way of doing this. Let's comment this out here, like that, and then let's run this, or let's make a more concise solution here. So it says, given a string, return a version where all the yaks are removed, but the a can be any character. So there is a special method on the string class called replace all, and notice that this is different than replace. Replace all is different than just the normal replace method. And this replace all method uses something called regular expressions. Now, I'm not going to go into regular expressions now. One, because they're way more advanced than what you really need on CodingBat, and we've also kind of mentioned them in CompSciClub. But I'm just going to show you how you could do this using the replace all method, but I'm not going to go into much detail about it. So I could say return start out replace all y.k with nothing. And if I run this, it works totally fine. So obviously this is much more concise than the stuff I had below. So just the brief version of what is going on here. Again, you can look into it more if you'd like to. But basically, this thing here that I've highlighted is a pattern, and this pattern matches any substring that looks like y followed by any character, the period means any character, followed by k. So if there's any part of this string, any substring of this string that matches this pattern, y.k, I will replace that with nothing. And like before, if you replace something with nothing, that's the same as removing it. So start out replace all y.k with nothing will remove any substring that looks like y, any character, and then k. So that's how we could do that problem much more concisely. Okay, so here is the next one. Go ahead and pause and try this on your own. Alright, so we're given an array of ints. We need to return the number of times that two sixes are next to each other in the array. It says also count the instance where the second 6 is actually a 7. So we need to count all the times where we see 6, 6 or 6, 7. And I'm going to assume overlapping is allowed. Yeah, I mean, the instructions kind of imply that overlapping is allowed. So let's do this here. We're going to use a very similar strategy that we've used before. So I'm just going to go through. I'm going to ignore the last character, not the last character, the last number in my array, because I don't want to go out of bounds. So I'm going to say while or less than nums.length -1. I'm going to say if, I don't need the curly braces here, if the character at this index is 6 and the character at the next index is 6 or 7. Notice the parentheses here because of the precedence, the operator precedence. So if we have a situation like that, we want to increment count, and when we're done, we want to return count. And let me see, what have I done here? For int I equals 0, I less than nums.length -1, I plus plus. If, let's see, what have I done? Oh, I did I plus 2 there instead of I plus 1. There we go. So yeah, it's always the small things in programming. And I know, like, if you're coding this and you're relatively new to Java, you're probably making a lot more of those tiny mistakes than I am. But that's like, don't get frustrated at that. That happens to everyone. You know, when I was first coding, I made like so many mistakes. You've probably forgotten plenty of semicolons or, you know, just stuff everywhere. But yeah, over time, over a lot of time, you tend to make less of those small mistakes. But as you can see, you still make them occasionally, as I do. Um, so yeah, that is how we could solve this problem. Again, we need to go from but we need to stop 1 before the end of the array, the last element in the array, so that we can do I plus 1 in here. So yeah, that is how we could solve that one. Okay, so now we're given an array of ints, and a triple is a value appearing 3 times in a row. We need to return true if the array does not contain any triples. So go ahead and try this one on your own. Pause now if you would like. All right, so now let's solve this. So let's see how we want to do this. So I'm going to actually do a kind of interesting thing here because I just want to. I'm going to say has triple. I'm going to make a helper method that returns true if the array does have a triple. And I'm going to implement that later. So in my main body, in my real method, that's solving the problem, I'm just going to say return true if it does not have a triple. There's no real need to do what I'm doing. I just think this is kind of clearer because I don't know. I think it's easier to test when something does have a condition than when it does not meet a condition. But like it really won't matter either way. So I'm just going to write this method now. Now I'm going to figure out whether or not this array does have a triple. And so, like before, you can generally see a trend here, right? If I need to look at 3 things in a row, I want to stop 2 before the end of the array. If I want to look at 2 things in a row, I need to stop 1 before the end of the array or string. If I just need to look at 1 element, I don't need to stop before the end of the array or string, right? So you can generally see in this case we're looking at 3 elements in a row, so we need to stop 2 before the end of the array. So I'm going to go through my array, but I'm going to stop 2 before the end of the array so that I don't go out of bounds here. And I'm going to say if nums I equals nums I plus 1 and nums I plus 1 equals nums I plus 2. So in other words, if these 3 numbers are equal, this is one way of writing it. You could also say if nums I equals nums I plus 2 there, that would be equivalent. But anyway, if I plus 1, and I plus 2, if the numbers at those indices are all the same, then we've found a triple. Wonderful. Return true. Otherwise, no, we don't even need an else. We just say return false. If we never enter this if statement and therefore we never return true, then we'll get down here and we'll return false. So there we go. That is how we could solve this problem here. All right, and here is the last one. It is called has271. It says we're given an array of ints. We need to return true if it contains a 271 pattern. That is a value followed by the value plus 5 followed by the value minus 1. Additionally, the 271 counts even if the 1 differs by 2 or less from the correct value. So this one getting a little more complicated, but go ahead and pause and try this on your own. Okay, let's go ahead and solve this one. So, let's see. So like before, we're going to, ignore the last 2 or stop 2 before the end of the array because we're looking at 3 things in a row. So I'm going to say for int I equals 0, I less than the length minus 2, I plus plus. Okay, so if, let's see here. So I'm going to say, you could condense this. You could write what I'm about to write a lot more concisely. But I'm just going to say first equals nums I, second equals nums I plus 1, and third equals nums I plus 2. So I'm going to say if first, let's see, if second equals first plus 5. So if the second number is 5 more than the first, and the difference between the third number, so the third number should be 1 less than the first number, right? Actually, let's see, what does it say? Yeah, the third number should be 1 less than the first number. So if the difference between the third number and the first number minus 1, you could mathematically expand that, or distribute the minus sign there if you wanted to. So if the absolute value of the difference between, or if the absolute difference between the third value and what the third value is supposed to be, which is first minus 1, if that difference is less than or equal to 2. So if both of these conditions are satisfied, then we will return true, and we'll return false otherwise. So there we go. That is how we could solve this one. Again, the math.abs function is very helpful. So that is how we could do this problem here. If you wanted to not use the variables here and just like put this in the line like that, this is called inlining the variables, where you replace the actual variable with what it stores. You could do that here if you wanted to. I think it's kind of clearer if we use the variable and just easier to code. But however you want to do it. So that is more CodingBat. That is Warmup-2, the section Warmup-2. We will get into string1 next time, where we'll look at some more strings. But that is going to be all for this video. Only an hour and 20 minutes. So compared to the last one, at least, it's not that bad. But yeah, I will see you in the next video.